All right. I'm just going to kick it off. And what we're covering today is third-party libraries inside of React. There is going to be two in particular I want to cover. We'll do material UI for the lecture, and then anybody that wants to hang around after the lecture can listen in on what this is, which is basically React 3 Fiber and a lot of additional React 3 Fiber related libraries. So I think I may have mentioned this before, but React 3 Fiber is a framework that allows us to very easily utilize Three.js with React component architecture. And React components work really well with Three.js. So we'll take a look at how to set up a scene just like this and how to integrate that with Material UI. But for now, let's switch over to Material UI. So the very first thing we're going to do is open up a new project. Can anyone tell me how to start a React project?
Create npm create vite at latest.
Exactly. So let's do that. Right. I'm going to just call this something like MUI demo. I'm going to select React, and I'm going to select my preferred variant, and then I'm going to follow these instructions. So with this npm install and then npm run dev, I can see my boilerplate React code. And it's just simple count state with our logos. Let's get rid of all that unnecessary stuff. So we're going to hop into app.tsx, which contains a lot of boilerplate code that we no longer need. We're going to get rid of this as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a nav bar. First, just through plain old vanilla JavaScript and JSX. And then we'll look at creating a nav bar utilizing Material UI. So if you all aren't aware of this, there's a really cool extension that allows us to very quickly create React boilerplate code. So if I wanted to create a React functional component, I just type RFC, and this will create a functional component for me. So from here, I could start writing out how I want my navbar to behave. And basically what I want is for something that will return a few dividers, a few containers, and I want all of that to be in a single horizontal line. So you all have probably been using divs so far. Span is very similar to div. It's really just a container. But unlike div, it by default will render its children in line, in a single line. So with this, I'll be able to say something like have a title called navbar. Let's turn that into a header. And I'll give a class name to this container. I'm going to call it left container. From here, I'm just going to copy paste for my middle and right containers. All right, middle container is probably going to be blank for now. So let's get rid of this. And my right container is what's going to have my navigation links. So can anyone tell me how to make a list of elements.
You start with an ordered list or unordered list, and then you can do the list elements themselves underneath it or inside it.
Exactly. Thank you. So let's do that. We're going to do list uh, element, and we're going to do buttons basically for each of these. Yeah, let's have this one say home. Let's have this one say goodbye. And let's have this one say read fiber. We need on clicks for these so that they could actually do something. So we're going to create our on click. And inside of our curly brackets, we're going to pass in an anonymous function. So I'm going to write my parentheses, delete this extra one, use my fat arrow to then point to the expression. The expression is going to be calling state from above. So let me actually pass that state down first. So inside of app, I'm going to create a new state. I'm going to call it page. And I'm going to set a setter to set page. And I want to, by default, use a state of 0. Now, in order to pass this down to my component, I'll need to import that component first. So I'm going to import my nav bar. And then I'm going to render that nav bar. And I could either leave both the opening and closing tags like this, or I could close it within the same, I guess, container wrapper, forget what they're called. And we can pass in properties through here. So what I want to pass is set page. I want set page to allow us to change the page that is currently showing. So let's do nav bar set page, and let's see. Okay. So what is going on here? Imported use state. Oh, this might be nothing. Let me then go to my nav bar and pass in props. So now I should be able to call the property that I want. And I'm going to call this inside of the onClick method. And this is where I'm going to say props dot set page. And I'm going to pass in a value. This will be 0. This will be 1, and then the next one will be 2. Let's get those missing curly brackets in there, and then let's update those parameters. Okay. The complaints went away, and now we just see a complaint about page not being used at all. So let's actually render some content. I'm going to leave this nav bar up here, maybe put it into some container later on when this starts to get a little more complex. But for now, I'm just going to create a separate divider. I'm going to call this something like page. And then I can start rendering some content. Let's say all I really want to do for the hello page is say hello world. So let's do that. And then for goodbye world, I want to say goodbye world. If we were to look at this right now, this is what we see. So there's still quite a bit left to do. Like we've got to definitely style our nav bar because it is not looking like a nav bar. And then we'll have to add some conditional rendering to get these to not load at the same time. So let's start with the nav bar because it's just some plain CSS. And let me just grab. Yeah, there it is. We're going to, let's get rid of all this. This is the stuff that came with our boilerplate code, so we don't need any of that anymore. And we could say nav bar. And actually, let me go back and make sure that this has a class name of navbar. So now that my span has a class name, I can point to that class name with the period, because remember, the hash points to an ID of an element. So my navbar is going to basically have a fixed position. I want it to be 0 pixels from the top, and I want it to be 0 pixels from the left. And I want the width of this to be 100% of the window. And then let's just give it some arbitrary height, like 60 pixels. And we're going to set some additional parameters like display. Display will allow us to basically render the children in a particular way. And what we want is for a flexible rendering of these children, because we want 3 containers, right? A left container, a middle container, and a right container. From here, we're going to use justified content. Let's just do space between. This will adjust how the content appears, like the separate containers appear next to one another. Then we want to do an align item center, just because that will look more visually pleasing. And let's set a background color, because right now it's the exact same color as our current background. So let's do this to distinguish it from the background. So I'm going to set this to white. So I don't need a hash for that. And let's take a look. Cool. Now we've got a nav bar that's fixed to the top of the page. But there's still some more work that we can do, like these containers. They are not rendering the way we want them to. So let's work on that. First, actually, no, we've already given these. Sorry, what was that? Okay. We've already given these class names, so we could start actually writing out some CSS. When you're writing out CSS, as you see above, we're able to point to the element itself, an element through its ID, or an element through its class name, like we're doing here. We could also point to multiple classes at the same time. So if I wanted some properties to be shared between all 3 of these containers, I would do something like this. And this needs to be singular. And let's say I want them all to have a height of 100%. So if I decide to change the height of my nav bar later on, these will all stretch to match that height. From here, I want some individual CSS parameters. Let's say for the left container, I don't want it to be flushed all the way to the left. So I'm going to use a margin left to set a distance of, let's say, 50 pixels. I'm going to run, I don't know if I need that yet. I'm just going to do that for now. And then for my middle container, I don't think I need anything either. But let's do a flex grow so that this will fill up any unused space. And then right container is going to have a margin right of, let's say, 50 pixels again, so we have some uniformity with our styling. Cool. It's no longer hugging the left edge of the screen. And from here, we could start working on these, the unordered list and the list items. we didn't give any of these class names, but we don't need to. If we're targeting the right container and it's children only, we could type something like this, dot right container, and then the name of the element itself. So the unordered lists, for example. Let's give this a list style type of none so that no fancy styling is happening. Let's give it a padding of 0 so we don't have internal space in between these items. And let's just do, I don't know, a margin on the top. And I already have a margin on the right, so I don't need to add that here. And for the individual list items themselves, I want them to display in a single row horizontally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to update this CSS to say display inline. Cool. Now, I don't like how they're all squeezed together, so let's add another margin. Let's do a margin, right? Let's say 20 pixels. Cool. So here's my nav bar so far. All right, now let's work on these actual pages. So we have hello world, goodbye world. Can someone tell me what I can do? One thing I can do to separate these.
Are you talking separate them, like each have their own container, or separate them within the container? Or component, I mean, sorry.
Either or. How would you do it? How would you make it so that these render on different pages?
Oh, then yeah, you could use the conditional rendering, or I mean, I guess if they're going to be separate elements, I would have them each have their own component. If I want one to show up and while the other's not, then I would probably have two components.
Yeah, definitely. Both of those are right answers. If you're expecting to have a lot of complexity in your component, you're going to want to separate it into its own component just to keep things very modular and clean. And the first thing that you said was also, it also works as well to just use ternaries, because right now I just have something super simple, right? So I can wrap these inside some curly brackets, and I can say something like if the page equals 0, then let's only render hello world. And if the page equals 1, then we render goodbye world. So let's go back to our site. And now we see we have two separate pages. Okay, so that's all hunky-dory, but today's lesson is supposed to be about third-party libraries. So we saw how easy it was to build out a nav bar from scratch. Let's see if it's even easier to build out a nav bar using a third-party library. So we're going to use Material UI, and we're going to read its documentation because that's what we do as engineers. We read documentation every day. I want to look at how to install this. It's telling me that I'm going to need these packages. So let me exit out of this. I'm going to install my packages. And I'm going to create a separate folder. Let's say MUI assets, just to keep things a little neat. And from here, I'm going to make a new file. I'm going to call this MUI navbar. So let's see what navbars look like inside of Material UI. Maybe I need to backtrack though. I didn't actually introduce Material UI. It's an open source component library that is supposed to make it very easy to build things from scratch. Because if we look through its documentation, we could see that they have all sorts of different components, right? Like we'll be able to implement autocomplete. We will be able to implement things like buttons, checkboxes, sliders, text fields, and it's actually really easy how we could do this, at least to start, because it's kind of like a plug and play style library, right? So if I was to go to wherever the nav bar is, I guess we're calling it an app bar on this page. I'm just gonna grab this example. I'm gonna show the code. I can switch between JavaScript and TypeScript depending on my preferences. And then I can just go ahead and copy all of this. Copy, paste. I go to my app. I import the MUI nav bar now. UI assets. And let's see what that looks like. So MUI navbar. Right, I got to restart my app.
Yeah, I think also the file name, you named it, you didn't do JSX, you did TSX for the nav bar.
Oh, good call.
In
Am I
the actual file name.
okay? I want TSX though. Did I import it as
Oh,
the wrong thing? Oh, I should probably update this. I copy pasted, so its default name was button app bar. I named my component MUI nav bar. So I'm going to save that. Ooh, still doesn't like that. Oh, my import is still bad. Missing that /. Okay, now what else is wrong? Something inside of this. I did not install Material UI icons material because our README did not tell us to do that. So let's go back to that documentation. We've only installed Material, Emotion React, and Emotion Style D. What about icons? Oh, here it is. It wants us to install icons-material. So let's do that too. And I'm just going to open up a split terminal so I don't have to exit out of my app and run my install. Cool. Now I should be able to see this. Yes, I finally can see it. The styling looks completely wrong though. So we were hoping it'd be as easy as copy pasting, but that's apparently a little too easy. So let's see what we can do to change this. We created some CSS before, and we were pointing to our elements using period, or I should say dot, or yeah, dot notation or hashes. Inside of Material UI, there's another way to apply styling. I don't remember what it's called. I just know that it looks something like this. Yes, SX, which stands for SX props. What does that stand for? Style function. Is that what that is? Okay. Anyway, in Material UI, we could use something like SX to just quickly apply some CSS. So let's say, first off, what did we do for our regular nav bar? We gave it a width of 100. So maybe we want to do that for here as well. Let's see. does not like that. I think if I correctly, the syntax is a little weird for the SX. Let's look at the documentation. So let's look up SX, the SX prop, how to customize. It's the best option for adding style overrides to a single instance of a component in most cases. Why wasn't the percent symbol working? Not 100% sure, but I wonder if I were to try vertical width, if that would work. Maybe it has to be a string. Ooh, that seems to work. Except it looks like I've got a margin to the left of it. Let's see if that's actually the case. So opening up my dev console, I could go to my pointer, click here. It does look like there is some padding going on here. So let's try getting rid of that padding. Padding 0. Refresh. Looks like the padding is actually coming out of root. So let's go back to our CSS. Let's go back to root and let's add our, oh, there it is. Padding is at 2. We don't want that. Let's get rid of that. Okay. All right. Now we've got it looked fine, and then apparently it wasn't. If I close this, then I'm not able to. That's being really weird. All right, something is throwing off the styling. But let's play around with our CSS and see what it is. Well, let's do a few more things first. Like, I don't know if I need this actually, so I'm gonna get rid of that. And it might be easier if I do something like this. We'll worry about the extra space on the left later on. Let's just continue playing around with what this looks like. Let's set the distance from the top to 0. Doesn't like that. Oh, it doesn't want the semicolon. But it looks like that's not. Okay. I was missing the position. It was set to static before, but now I'm setting it to fixed so that it's actually going to accept these properties. And let's see if we return this. All right, even at full screen, it's stretching all the way horizontally. Okay. So I have one link. I want 3. I don't want it to see login. I want it to do something else. Oh, actually, one more thing. I don't like this background color. So let's do background. Let's just set it to black. All right, we've got a black background now. From here, we've got to add some additional links. So let's look at our MUI navbar. Let's see where it's saying login. And here it is. It's just a very simple button. So let's duplicate that. And just like we did before, we could use a very simple on-click that accepts the setter from the parent component. So home, actually it said hello, didn't it? Hello, goodbye, and React Fiber. Okay. From here, we could do exactly what we did before, where we go to our parent, we pass in a prop, set page equals set page. We then want to inherit that prop. and we want to attach that to an on click. And inside of our on click expressions, we have to utilize anonymous functions or lambda expressions for a few reasons. I think one is that this way it doesn't execute as soon as the code is read and rendered. This has to actually trigger in order for the expression to be read. So now we're going to do props dot set page. Actually, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this last week, but I'm just going to say it again. There are a few different ways to pass down props. So that's the regular way. We could also destructure our props and say individually what we want. So if I want just the set page, I can use the curly brackets to destructure my props. And now I could just say set page. Of course, I'm still going to need parentheses because it behaves like a function, and I want to pass in a value of 0. Now let's duplicate this and let's see if it works. Hello world, goodbye world. Cool. Any questions on any of this? All right. Today's lesson has you using material router, I believe. And right, it's just material UI and the router component inside of it. Or no, I think it's called router because we want to create a routing kind of functionality. That's the first challenge. And then the second challenge, if you have time for it, is a bit more of a bonus. The idea is to look for a third-party library, do a bit of research, maybe pick from one of these lists and explore it. All right, I will set up breakout rooms. Everyone can take a 15-minute break. And if anyone wants to hang out in the main room for some additional content, then I could walk through some of the React 3 fiber stuff. Sound good? Cool. Let's cut that recording. Snap.